Oh, come on. The stakes will raise too, of course. Maybe I'll offer you a steak dinner at some point. All right. The future, friends. We're not talking about just the Jetsons. We're talking about the future. It is the most dreaded question anywhere I've gone in life, amongst my family, at school, at work, amongst friends. So what's next? What do you want to do with your life? What's your 5, 10, 15-year plan? Anybody love that question? I get a little bit of anxiety every time I hear that question because it's like, oh, well, it pushes me completely out of my comfort zone because not only do I have to make a plan, but I have to think about how am I going to get there? What am I supposed to do to make this happen? There's an interesting study that came out. One of the benefits of TikTok, I suppose, is you get to hear real-life stories that come from different people. And one of the things that went viral pretty recently came from a teacher who engages with middle school kids as well as early high school kids. And he asked them, what do you want to be when you grow up? Over 8 years of teaching, his most common answer was a firefighter, a doctor, or an engineer. And that's like fantastic, great. You know there's a lot of hard work going into that. And you know that you're going to have to put a lot of time into it. You're going to have to practice that well. Within the couple recent years, the most common answer now is, I want to be a billionaire. And the teacher would shrug his shoulders and say, well, how are you going to get there? And he noticed that all of the students refused to do any of the work assigned to them. They will not even crack open the book. They're expecting instant success, a life hack, something to make it happen without doing the work. Kind of like this picture says, you're seeing very few people trying to work hard. Everyone's looking for a life hack. The temptation comes when we get overwhelmed by the weight of perceived success or the lack of it. If we're not obtaining success, or the thing that we think will be successful, we learn to accept shame into our lives, even without feeling it. And how I want to define shame comes from the dictionary definition: a painful feeling of humiliation or distress caused by the consciousness of wrong or foolish behavior. The thing is, we become shameful people, but we no longer even recognize the shame. We become shameful people by cutting all the corners of trying to get to the goal that we're perceiving is the best place for us to be. We're looking for quick success, the lottery effect of being able to feel fulfilled. And this can play out in so many different ways. It could play out in finding the right relationship. It could play out in finding the right job. It could play out in finding some kind of meaningful success in your life, be it a house or a dream car or finding an ethereal amount of money to make you feel fulfilled. And it can also play out in your own faith with God, trying to make something happen. But what will happen when we discover the truth that we are not good enough or wise enough or powerful enough to build God's kingdom, that we're not able to manufacture success? What happens when we realize that? An author writes this idea of the difference between a striving atom and a soulful atom. Striving atom is the one that has the desire to conquer, create, and control in order to produce goods. It is the one that seeks success. That by itself is not bad, but that alone, and that is the most common place for us to be, can become overwhelming. It can become completely about how do I produce a result that gives me fulfillment. On the opposite side, you have the soulful atom, the one that is called to serve humbly, the one that is seeking relationships with others and the Creator. It is a beautiful place to be, but it is not a calling just to remain inert, as if you are a loving potato. You're not doing nothing. Both work in conjunction with one another. God has created us to work and to strive, but to strive by yourself misses the point. You are made to be both soulful and striving, and you may be left wondering, what is the right or the best way to live? To give you kind of a recap from where we've come up to this point, we're going to focus and zoom in on the life of Ish-Bosheth. We're going to say that name so many times today. Let's say Ish-Bosheth. There we go. We're going to get some Hebrew in us. The name literally means man of shame. Great name. I'll give you a little fun fact, too. This is actually a nickname for Ish-Bosheth. His original name was Ish-Baal, which means man of the pagan god, man of the master. And his name was flipped because he lived out shamefully. Ish-Bosheth was installed as a king by Abner, likely his relative, I believe his uncle, over the majority of Israel. He ruled over about 11 different tribes in much of the land. He was not anointed to be king. He was not even appointed by the people. He was installed by a kingmaker. It's like, here you go. Here's all the success that you could possibly ever want. Great. Feels good. Ish-Bosheth's entire reign as king, though, was filled with warfare. There was constant fighting over the 2 years which he reigned. And over that course of time, the house of Saul, the entire land that he was controlling, grew weaker and weaker and weaker. Abner, his uncle, betrays him after Ish-Bosheth tries to confront him. And he turns to David, who is the true anointed king. He loses his only support. He loses the kingmaker, and he grows afraid. He has no response. Ish-Bosheth capitulates to David when David says, "Give me back my wife." Ish-Bosheth, here you go. Here's my sister. He's losing it. And then when Abner, his uncle, dies, when the kingmaker dies, when the powerful man dies, Ish-Bosheth, as well as all of Israel, is left terrified. The word in Hebrew literally is saying his hands grow limp. He can't act anymore. And I choose this picture because, honestly, life can feel like a maze rather than being amazing. Life can feel just full of so many twists and turns, and you don't know what the right way is. You make the wrong turn so often. But when you do this thing where you blitz through life and you break down the walls, you got to look back at the destruction that was left behind. And when you're stuck there, you have to ask, how do I either pick up the pieces or start new? For Ish-Bosheth, he didn't start new. He stayed still. This is kind of where we're looking today. We're moving from shame to an eternal perspective. We're embracing growth and redemption with the big idea that Jesus' way may go astray from the world's display of success, but it is always the best way. It is the best way because he is our perfect Savior. He is the best option because he gives us the most fulfilling life, and he's giving that fulfilling life to an imperfect being. We are imperfect, but we have a perfect Savior who invites us to come to him, broken as we may be, but whole, made whole in him. So here's how this plays out. Verse 1. Ish-Bosheth, Saul's son, heard about Abner's death at Hebron. He lost all courage, or his hands went limp. And all of Israel was paralyzed with fear. Now there were two brothers, Baana and Rechab, who were captains of Ish-Bosheth's raiding parties. They were sons of Rimmon, a member of the tribe of Benjamin, who lived in Beeroth. The town of Beeroth is now part of Benjamin's territory because the original people of Beeroth fled to Gittaim, where they still live as foreigners. So a couple things to point out with this. Ish-Bosheth's world comes crashing down. He's got no support anymore. His family is diminishing, and he's left wondering, what am I supposed to do next? He is afraid, and because of his fear, he is also inspiring his nation that he is leading to grow afraid. This word for fear that Israel has is akin to how Saul is described when he is pronounced judgment. Saul, back in 1 Samuel 28, falls flat on his chest and does not move. He's paralyzed with fear. He is so afraid, he doesn't want to do anything anymore. It is such fear that it moves you to a place of complete paralysis. Anybody remember what that feels like back in 2020? when everything started shutting down. I still remember hearing news about how obsessive people came with toilet paper. Do you remember this? It was such a craze seeing aisles that had limitations on the amount of toilet paper if it was there. And even in that, with that stock of toilet paper at home, the walls covered with toilet paper that some people had, there was still a deep-seated fear of wondering, what's going to happen next? Will this sickness overwhelm us to the point where we can't do anything, where we're all going to die? And our leaders, all they kept saying is, we have a solution, but we're all doomed. Did anybody feel inspired during 2020? Not really. This is where Israel is. All of the news bringers, all of the elders, all of the leaders, doomsayers. All of our leaders are gone. We've lost multiple kings at this point. The hierarchy of power is weak as it stands. Our only leader right now is cowering inside of his house. And then it shifts to two of Ish-Bosheth's relatives, who are also part of the same tribe of Benjamin. Baana and Rechab, who are listed to be some of the only powerful people left of any repute. They are part of the raiding bands who would go out, and the only way to maintain money during that time is to pillage and rob and destroy other warring nations. So this is how they got their revenue. There was no tax system during this time. This is how the government stayed afloat. So we see these two boys. We pause for a moment. And we have this kind of like disjointed story that comes in verse 4. It says, Saul's son Jonathan had a son named Mephibosheth. Let's say Mephibosheth together because he's going to come up a lot. Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth is also a nickname because his name also has the word Baal in it as well, which likely means he is the great warrior of this pagan god. And his name is kind of tricky because it still has that element of shame in it. This nickname is talking about how it is a conqueror or to be conquered by shame. It's a very interesting word picture. And we're going to talk more about that too, especially over the next several times throughout the 2 Samuel series. But we're introduced to Mephibosheth. He was crippled as a child at 5 years old when the news that Saul and Jonathan had been killed in battle. When they heard this news, the child's nurse heard it. She picked him up and fled, but as she was hurrying away, she dropped him, and he became crippled in his feet. Both feet were shot. And with very little medical abilities during that time to repair bones, this was his condition for life. So why is this here? It's kind of disjointed because all we're focusing on is Ish-Bosheth. This verse here is supposed to show that the only possible successor to the throne is also crippled, with one whose hands are limp and unwilling to do anything. This young boy, 12 years old at the time, is also unable to lead a nation. The house of Saul is dying. So we come back to Rechab and Baana. We don't have exactly where Beeroth is, but it's probably about here. So they make this plan that we're about to read, and they travel with this very intentional plan down to Mahanaim. And it says, one day Rechab and Baana, the sons of Rimmon from Beeroth, went to Ish-Bosheth's house. Scary. Around noon, and this was when he was taking a midday rest. The doorkeeper, who had been sifting wheat, had become drowsy and was sleeping. So Rechab and Baana slipped past her. They went to the house. They found Ish-Bosheth sleeping on his bed. They struck him and killed him and cut off his head. Oh, great. Then, taking his head with them, they fled across the Jordan Valley throughout the night. It's not a pretty story. That is not a good way to go down. That is terrifying. They were able to sneak in and fully escape. And these were supposed to be his brothers, his family. But they see weak Ish-Bosheth, this man of shame, unwilling to do anything, and they say, we have an opportunity, don't we? Hey, brother, let's go kill our brother. Hey, brother, let's cut off his head. And we're going to take it to the powerful king and make something of our life. They're seeking quick success, but they're not paying attention to the damage. They were born, friends, as Benjaminites, but now they will be marked by their decisions. We'll see what the effect of that looks like. So the Great Escape, I want you to see how nutty this is. They're having to travel 60 miles in a very short amount of time. And this was one of Israel's greatest defense systems. Mahanaim is somewhere around here, and they would have snuck down the mountains to where the Jordan River is, and hiding along the pathway, they would have ran all the way down to Hebron, which is probably over here. I couldn't get a full picture. But they did it in record time, carrying a grizzly head, practicing their speech for David, practicing what they would do to earn the maximum amount of success. So here they are, 2 warrior young boys. When they arrive at Hebron, they presented Ish-Bosheth's head. I picture it. They're like, there's his head. Here you go, David. Bowling. Look, they exclaimed to the king. Here's the head of Ish-Bosheth. He's giving him reminders. This is your enemy, the son of your enemy, Saul, who tried to kill you. First there's a reminder of, who this is. Second, there is a declaration of the identity, the total identity of who this is. Then they say the total intention behind this. They're declaring themselves as revenge seekers for the sake of the Lord. They say, today the Lord has given my Lord, pledging allegiance to the king, revenge on Saul and his entire family. They practiced this. They had this rehearsed. They were seeking the maximum effect of their actions. They were trying to take opportunity, using that opportunism to become something great. They don't know David very well. If you remember from chapter 1, something similar happens where an Amalekite comes in, a young boy as well, trying to seek a little bit of fame, presents David both the crown and the arm bracelet, saying, your greatest enemy is dead, and his offspring is dead as well. I personally killed them. David doesn't take it. He doesn't take the bait. He could have said, fine, this is great. I'm going to celebrate. I'm going to revel in this quick success. I'm going to become something great. David doesn't do that. David, again, doesn't take the bait. David here even doesn't take the bait either. He says, David said to Rechab and Baanah, the Lord who saves me from my enemies is my witness. Someone once told me Saul is dead, thinking they were bringing me good news. But I seized him and killed him at Ziklag. That's the reward I gave him for his news. How much more should I reward evil men who have killed an innocent man in his own house on his own bed? Shouldn't I hold you responsible for his blood and rid the earth of you? Ouch. I don't think they were expecting that. I think they were expecting like a, good job, you killed my enemy. Give me a hug. Here's $1 million. No. They said, your reward is death. You will be held responsible for your actions. Does that terrify you? Because one day you're going to be standing before a king. And you're going to be held responsible for your actions. And if you're coming before the Lord and saying, look at me, I'm something great, you're going to be quickly mistaken, very quickly. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. But what I want you to see is the after effect of what happens. The reward that is given to these boys, it's equally grisly. David ordered the young men to be killed. And the David's servants, they killed him. They cut off the hands and the feet of these boys and hung their bodies beside the pool at Hebron. And they took Ish-Bosheth's head and buried it in Abner's tomb in Hebron. Kind of crazy, because you think, David, why'd you have to cut off the hands and the feet? That's kind of weird, right? This is showing there's no more power in the house of Saul, neither the hands or the feet. There's no power in robbing an innocent man. This was peacetime between Ish-Bosheth and David. The war was ended, but still they went and they tried to take action into their own hands. They hung the bodies beside the pool because this was a display for criminals where it says a distance is the perpetrators from the innocent. David was innocent. He did not order this death. He says, this is the enemy. This is the one who did the wrong. Pay attention. And it's kind of a big reverse, because what was supposed to happen during this time was that the new king that comes in was supposed to completely eradicate the entire house before them. David was supposed to kill all of Saul's family, any sons, any daughters, any grandchildren, to prevent any amount of insurrection. And everybody was looking at David, kind of like this picture, where it says, all of you are wrong. Everybody was expecting David to do just this. But what he does instead is he executes the murderers of the house of Saul, saying, this wasn't my place to do this. It's God's place to judge. I'm following God instead of the world's expectations. And he goes even further to bury Ish-Bosheth's head honorably with his uncle. It's a beautiful picture of doing the upside down kind of thing. So what we must consider is what we must consider is that we may think that we're doing good in life, but what do we understand? But what do we understand, or what do you understand about who and what you're living for? Two verses that come to my mind come from Matthew 7:21 through 23, as well as Isaiah 64:6. So I'll start with Isaiah 64:6. Give you a quick question first. How many of you think that you're a good person? It's okay if you raise your hand. I almost feel like I'm a good person most of the time. I try to be good. I try to do good stuff. I try to do the best that I possibly can. I try to be a good father. I try to be a good son. I try to be a good friend. I try to be generally a good person. I try to pick up the trash when I see it. Hooray, my good deed of the day. But what it says in Isaiah 64:6 is that we're all infected and impure with sin. When we display our righteous deeds, they're nothing but filthy rags. Like autumn leaves, we wither and fall, and our sins sweep us away like the wind. Does that mean that we do nothing and we stop doing good stuff? No. What that means is they don't justify us. They do not clean us. They do not save us. Matthew 7:21 through 23 says this, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do mighty works in your name? And when I declare to them, I never knew you, depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Oof. What does that mean? The key phrase is, I never knew you. Because the relationship that these people described have was all about themselves and trying to earn salvation, finding quick success even at the end of life, saying, look at all the good stuff I've done. God says they're nothing but filthy rags if that's all you have. When you have me, it changes everything. When you're doing this by yourself, it's nothing. So what do you do? During the No Regrets conference, I was challenged by this because I have said this all my life. Some of the most dangerous words you can say together, wherever you are in life, is, say it with me, I got this. You don't. The trick is you don't. The more you believe this lie, the more susceptible you are to impending destruction, because you're going to keep finding those life hacks. You're going to keep trying to find some quick method to make success happen. The thing is, we need to find a firm foundation. Right after this passage, where Jesus declares that not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will inherit the kingdom of God, he follows it with this example of what a firm foundation looks like. He says, anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise, like a person who builds a house on solid rock. Though the rain comes in torrents and the floodwaters rise and the winds beat against the house, it won't collapse because it is built on bedrock. But anyone who hears my teaching and does not obey it is foolish, like a person who builds their house on sand. When the rains and floods come, and the winds beat against the house, it will collapse with a mighty crash. The differentiation, friends, is this. You have to ask yourself, what are you basing your life on? Who are you following? If you're understanding that Jesus is giving you teaching that is fulfilling you, that is calling you to a life of greatness that is found in him, when you walk in conjunction with him, when you are living as a soulful Adam, where you have connection with the Creator, where you're thinking outside of yourself, when you have that in all of your striving, you are a wise person on solid rock, on solid foundation, so that even when dangers come, even when troubles come, you will not be broken because you're made whole. But if you're not listening, especially when you hear the teaching of Jesus, if you're knowing the truth but saying, I'm going to live however I want to live, it's going to catch up to you. No matter how many life hacks you have, it's going to catch up to you. You can look at all the damage that has happened in your life. Jesus has already seen it. The new life that you're called to is in Jesus Christ, where you are made whole. And you may not know what the next steps look like because, friends, when you follow Jesus, the big question that many Christians ask is, what's next? How do I live this Christian faith? How do I live this walk? And it's going to be one small step at a time. And I can tell you, I've asked this question many times over the course of my life. I can think back that 5, 10, 15 years back in the past. I can look at myself, and if I had a conversation with myself, I'd be like, how are you here? How are you on the stage preaching? That doesn't make any sense. I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to practice martial arts and do that as a career. I wanted to do something where I felt great for myself. But now I've learned to live a life of surrender because I was empty back then. And the small steps I took bit by bit, where I gave up more and more of the things I thought I controlled, now I'm in a place where I'm learning to be fulfilled entirely by Jesus. I'm not perfect, friends. You're not perfect either. We can't pretend to be perfect. You don't have this, but Jesus does. So the last set of verses I want to give you comes from 1 Peter 2, 4 through 6. You are coming to Christ, who is the living cornerstone of God's temple. He was rejected by people, but he was chosen by God for great honor. And you are the living stones that God is building in his spiritual temple. What more? You are his holy priests. You are representatives of Jesus Christ. If you call yourself a Christian, you're representing him. You are the light to the world. It changes everything. Even when all the news that is coming out about wars and sicknesses and problems and plane crashes, you're the light, friends. If you're a Christian, you are the light. You are a living stone of God's temple and a representative to the watching world. And it is such a beautiful privilege. Again, what more? You are holy priests. Through the mediation of Jesus Christ, you offer spiritual sacrifices that please God. As the scriptures say, I am placing a cornerstone in Jerusalem, chosen for great honor, and anyone who trusts in him will not be disgraced. Or, put another way, you don't have to be a being of shame anymore. You're different now. Just to give you, again, one more small highlight. Ish-Bosheth was called man of shame. Mephibosheth is called conqueror of shame. Later on, David invites Mephibosheth into his presence and says, like Mephibosheth comes before him ashamed, saying, I'm nothing but a dead dog. Why do you want anything to do with me? And what's beautiful is David is fulfilling his vow to Jonathan, his best friend, who was recently killed. And he says to Mephibosheth that he's going to take care of him, that he's going to provide for him, that he can have a seat at the kingdom, at the table with David, and eat meals with him. Romans 10 through 11 says, "For it is by believing in your heart that you are made right with God, and it is by openly declaring your faith that you are saved. As the scriptures tell us, anyone who trusts in him will not be disgraced." We are Mephibosheth when we recognize that we are nothing. We cannot provide a way for ourselves to make success. But when we come before Jesus, as Mephibosheth does, saying, I'm nothing, why do you want me? God declares, I want you. You may not have this, but I do, and I will fulfill you perfectly. He gives us grace, which is receiving what you don't deserve, and mercy, not getting what you do deserve. Instead, you are given this mercy and grace. You are given a relationship with him that is made whole, that you can never achieve on your own, but that he gives perfectly. Ignite can come up at this time. The big idea is this, friends. Jesus' way may go astray from the world's display of success, but it is always the best way. Bottom line that I want to give you is that we are called to love righteousness more than success, even if Jesus' way may look like failure to the world's standards. We may be confident that Jesus is the best standard. You're going to experience something in your friend group, something in your workplace, something wherever you are in life where it is not normal to follow Jesus' way. Where everybody is looking at you saying, why aren't you doing what we do? It's because you have something better. Quick success may capture the moment, but it will always lead to a ruinous future where where if we don't consider what we're striving towards or how we maintain momentum, if God is not the one leading us, we are left on our own with both the dangers of success and the impending failure. Last, if it is God who is leading us, we are led best, even if we don't understand the method or the majesty. You might think it's the method or the madness, friends, because it can feel like madness according to the world, but it is majesty that you're experiencing because it is God's fulfillment. So my challenge to you, especially when you don't know what the next phase of life looks like, is do this 2-breath timeout. Breathe in. Ask the question, where and how do you want to lead me in this? Breathe out. Breathe in. Jesus, lead me as you lead best. Breathe out. When you're there, in that place of surrender, when you're there, trusting that Jesus will lead you best, when you're there, not knowing what comes in the future, it might feel uncomfortable, but that is the best place where you are most reliant on God. You don't have this, friends. The world will give you books that say, you've got this. But the world is wrong. You don't. You could try for as long as you want, but it will catch up to you. But I could tell you Jesus has this. And Jesus wants you. And Jesus will give you the best life ever. It may not be filled with riches. It may not be filled with fame. It may not be filled with popularity. But it is filled with an eternal perspective that leads to redemption and life everlasting. That's what we celebrate as Christians. To the world, that's shameful. But we are beings of shame that come before the shameful death that Jesus had, who died perfectly for you and is inviting you into fulfillment. I'd love to pray with you wherever you are in your life. If you need extra prayer, I'd love to pray for you up here. But my goal each week is to continue praying that you follow Jesus even if you're confused, and don't do life alone. Join us for our last song as we sing about a firm foundation.
Before